Welcome back, everyone. In this video, we're in Costa Rica, heading south towards Panama, but I know how much you guys like our tech videos, so in this video, I'm going to replace our SBMS 100 with the SBMS 0 and 4 of the DSSR 20 amp charge controllers with diversion. The diversion will allow us to connect this 600 watt water heater to surplus solar power once the batteries are done charging. Then, in this little mini series, we're going to parse the data coming out of the SBMS 0 using Python, send that to InfluxDB, graph it with Grafana, send it to Blink while we're at it, and then future videos we can connect the Meanwell 750 watt constant current power supply and integrate that with the SBMS 0 as well. Finally, to wrap it up, we've got a beautiful little touchscreen Raspberry Pi housing that we can set up to show all this beautiful graph data. So, without any further ado, let's get to it. Alright, so we're here now at our side compartment. This is where all of our electrical panel resides and our 20 lithium iron phosphate batteries. Now I've removed a lot of the equipment that normally lives in here. A lot of the storage stuff is out in the front of the truck, and I've removed the polycarbonate shield which normally encases the batteries, keeping them from getting shorted out by a folding chair or whatever. So like I said, the SBMS 0 is a lot more modular. The solar switching, charge controlling is all, the logic is all handled internally, but the physical switching is done externally, or the electronic switching is done externally. And one of the ways to do that, the cheapest and most efficient way, is with a DSSR 20. Now each one of these will switch 2 solar panels, and so for our 8 panels, we'll be using 4 of these. These are really nice because in addition to switching the solar on and off to charge your batteries, it also has a diversion heat output. So if you have a hot water heater or in-floor heat, you can switch excess solar to the heat diversion loads. So those are really nice. I'll get into some more detail on that later. So anyway, there's several differences between the original and the new one. I'll go through those as we go. It will be a lot easier to explain. First things first, however, we need to pull out the original SBMS 100, which involves disconnecting the solar and the battery balance leads from the SBMS 100 to the battery and replacing those with the new ones. To decommission the original SBMS 100, very important to disable both solar inputs before disconnecting anything. If you don't know why, check out the video linked above. Then we'll disconnect all the loads. Alright, so with all of the breakers disconnected, we've lost power to our ventilation fans and lighting, which we need to continue working because it's Costa Rica. So I've run a jumper directly from the battery to this fuse box. And now, with all the breakers off, we can safely disconnect the BMS lead. This runs down to our lithium batteries and collects the voltage information at each cell. So that's disconnected now, and this is safely powered down. Then I can safely disconnect these big lugs. Then we can get the Ugga and pull out the 2 bolts that fasten this to our aluminum backplane. And carefully disconnect. This is the load. This is the big connection that goes straight to the battery without a fuse, so be careful of that. And the 2 solar. And then the unit is free. Now to bypass the SBMS power switching, I'm going to temporarily connect this battery lead directly through this breaker to the rest of our loads. That's temporary, just for allowing us to remove this jumper that I had on there. So now we're all powered as we used to be. Everything's the same except we have no battery monitoring and no balancing at the moment, which is fine because this battery will last 10 days before we get to anything resembling low. Alright, so now I'll get rid of the original balance leads and shunt wiring. These wire tracks make it very nice to keep all this stuff organized. So the original Electrodac S100 was designed with this aluminum backplate as a heat sink, and I designed my build with a 3/16 aluminum plate as a backplane for this whole electrical panel to sink that heat away. There's very little heat, but when you're switching 100 amps, there's some wattage there anyway. The new SBMS Zero has no internal switching. It's all done externally, as I've mentioned, and so it was designed to be mounted in a panel. So you would cut a hole and then flush mount this in a panel somewhere next to your bed or whatever you want to do. But for my application, I want it right here where the original one was. Here's another shot of the back. You can see it's got cable connectors and some components here on the back that doesn't allow it to be flush mounted. And so I designed and 3D printed this handy dandy enclosure with hole spacing to match the original SBMS 100 hole positions. So the next thing I'm going to tackle is this rainbow colored ribbon cable, which is used for the battery balance leads. As you can see here, there's a wire running to each of the supercells, and in the case of the center one, there's 5. I won't get into the details because it doesn't matter, but suffice to say, the new ribbon cable is gray, which I prefer much more, and it has an extra conductor, actually 2 extra conductors, so that it powers the SBMS directly through the cable. So I need to swap out the original rainbow to the gray one. I've gone ahead and done some work here, as you can see, soldered the connections for the ribbon cable, and it may not be obvious, but I've put some clear shrink tubing on each of these as a strain relief. Alright, so I've got to kill the power here for just a minute. So there are no loads on anything, and I'm very carefully using the Ugga to disconnect these. I'm not using any significant amount of power. I just prefer to do it this way because there's less chance of swinging a big long wrench in here and shorting something out. So for that reason, very carefully going in here. Alright, so I've gone in and removed the stickers, tape that's holding this whole thing on. I want to mention something of safety here. I'm not being very reckless, as it may appear, but it is very important to only disconnect one bolt for these bus bars at a time, so not removing both of these. That way it cannot rotate. I had a scare once back in the day where I just kind of finger tightened everything and was getting it set up, roughing it in, and if these are allowed to swing when you're tightening this bolt, for example, and this catches and swings up, you're going to have a bad day. So while it may look like I'm being a little bit nonchalant, I've thought this through many a nights, and I have some experience with this, but be careful. If you're unsure of your abilities, or you're typically a clumsy person, I would suggest covering the bars you're not working with duct tape or some other insulator that's not going to move or fall out of the way, just to keep this from turning into a lightning show. Alright, so with that safety announcement out of the way, I just realized that I measured this with the cell balancing leads on this bar. So I'm going to need to switch these bolts around. So this looks complicated at first, perhaps. Mini conductor ribbon cable with eyelets all at random lengths, but it's actually pretty straightforward. The red bead on the left side here That's the most positive cell, as well as 2 power leads to power the SPMS itself. And then the next wire goes to the next cell. The next 5 wires go to the middle. Those are all joined in the case of a 4-cell battery, but if you had an 8-cell, you would utilize all of those wires there. Then the next eyelet goes to the next cell, and lastly ground goes to the most grounded cell. So let's get this put on. Alright, as you can see, I've got the battery balance lead installed here, and now we can power up the SPMS 0 for the first time. You need to do that without anything else installed, none of the shunts or anything else, because you need to go through and set the parameters. So, much like the original SPMS 100, it goes through its boot screen, calibrating the ISL chip and the ADCs. So now at the main menu, first things first is we need to go into the parameter settings, and you can see the default is 8 cells at 75 amp hours. We have 20 cells configured in 5-cell supercells, and then 4 cells in series. So we need to set our number of cells to 4. But before I do that, you'll notice here at the bottom there is a diagram showing how this ribbon cable should be connected for the number of cells you have. So by default it uses all of the wires to each cell, and you'll see here when I change this to 4 cells that it will show this middle batch of wires, these 5 cables here, all connected to the middle. Actually, it does it live. That's kind of neat. So there you can see wires 4, 5, 6, 7, and 8 are all connected together in the middle. So I'll save that, and then we have 900 amp hours total. 900, perfect. And store parameters. So that's the bare minimum that you need to do. I'm going to go back here to device settings, LCD, and change this menu color to something that's a little higher contrast for the camera. Yeah, green look nice. Oh yeah.
So nice.
So now I've got that set. Lithium iron phosphate is the cell chemistry, 4 cells, 900 amp hours. There are, down here, advanced settings, and there is a plethora of settings that you can change. Under voltage delays, end of charge voltages, short circuit delays, short circuit current, cell balance parameters, how the ISL chip will handle that, all kinds of stuff. The defaults are perfect. You don't really need to mess with it unless you're a super genius, but we'll not get into that right now. This is good for now. The next thing on the agenda is installing the current measuring shunts. So these are the shunts I'll be using. This one on the left is a 400 amp 75 millivolt shunt, and this is a 200 amp 75 millivolt shunt. And because of the configuration of my original install and the way I'm needing to retrofit this, there's several reasons I'm doing it this way. I've found myself a copper bar. Thank you to Carlos in Guatemala City for sparing some of that for me. And to that I've soldered both shunts for the best possible connection, as well as a physical mounting solution. And the reason I've done it this way is I have this 3/0 cable. You can see back here, hopefully. It's thick with 2 C's, and it's only this long. And so to install this shunt, it needs to be within this far of here. So I can't really put it anywhere else. I don't have access to better, longer cable where we are here in Costa Rica. So for that reason, I'm installing this shunt apparatus around the corner over here. Alright, so I'm sitting in our hallway inside now. These batteries are underneath our dinette floor, kept in this compartment here. And we were outside over here. Now we're wrapped around to the left, and this is about where this shunt is going to live. And it originally had some heavy corrosion, so I've polished that off. It looks like I'm going to need to give it another polishing here. And then I printed this 3D, or rather I 3D printed this little bit of an enclosure. This is only the back half right now, and this will hold the shunts approximately like this once it's all tightened up. And that's not for holding it in place structurally, as the copper bar will do that for me. That's just to keep a rogue wire from wandering up and touching battery positive. And then the manual calls for a twisted pair of wires for each of the shunts, and they suggest using Cat6 Ethernet cable. I don't have any solid core Cat6 cable with me, and so I'm utilizing an HDMI cable to connect to the shunts. So let's get that installed. So as you've seen in the previous shots, this copper bar tarnishes really quickly, so I've just taken a Scotch-Brite, given it a little bit of a brightening. Beautiful. And I will continue to do that, because in this humidity with my fingerprints, it tarnishes almost as fast as I clean it. And then for all of these connections, I'm using Nolox. This is a compound to prevent corrosion, primarily for aluminum electrical connections. However, it's not going to hurt anything, keeping the oxidization at bay on these parts. Alright, so I've got the shunt assembly halfway assembled. Just a little bit of finicky wire arranging here. This cable's marketed as oxygen-free solid core copper for deep, deep tones and super rich bass. So hopefully that translates to deep, deep accuracy on the ADC conversion on these shunts. But that's all there is for now. This is how it's going to be as I swing it up in here. I will try and arrest these wires from movement with some little dots of silicone or something just to keep them in place. And the rest of these cables I've just tied up out of the way. Now for the pucker factor moment, I need to swing this whole thing up into here without shorting this significant gauge copper bar against ground and going to those battery terminals, keeping in mind that there's a large bank of capacitors inside of the inverter, and that's going to pull a significant pop of current and probably give it a good solid crack. So let's do that.
Okay, ready? Got it?
Now here comes the thunder. Should be the only pop to do. Alright, today is tomorrow. We had a little bit of a rain shower come through and I needed to put away some stuff. So I'm back at it today. As you can see, I've done a little bit of work here, working ahead. I've installed the cable that goes to our breakers and fuses for all of our DC loads. Normally you'd want this going through a Victron battery protect to allow the SBMS 0 to disconnect the 12 volt loads if any of the cells got too low. Unfortunately, we're in a rural spot here in Costa Rica right now where I can't get one. And so I'm just going to keep a close eye on our battery and make sure it doesn't get too low. And, you know, that being said, we've got a giant battery bank here. we rarely go below 70 or 80%, so that shouldn't be a problem. But I will try and think of some way to disconnect our batteries here. Moving on, I did temporarily connect the SBMS 0 wires to the shunt. As you can see, it's all powered up and monitoring the cells, and you can see here we've got a 11 amp load that's powering our ventilation fans and the lights and so on right now. I also did some prep work on the DSSR20s. The way Dacian designed these, there's these spacers made from PCB material that protect the components on the back or space it out from wherever you're mounting it. And so to make it easier on me, I've just put a dot of super glue in a couple places and glued one of the spacers to the DSSR20 and one of the spacers to the little back plate here, just to protect these parts as I'm fumbling around trying to get it installed. And then I have fewer parts to try and align when I go to put it together. So to keep the wires as short as possible between the DSSR20s and the shunt, I've decided to mount it right here on the side of the batteries. This piece of angle aluminum was there before. That straps the batteries in and keeps them locked in place, but I've added this one on the side just so I had room for the second mounting hole, and of course drilled and tapped the holes M3 to align or to match the holes in the DSSRs. The next thing is connecting up the solar panels. Now I have 2 of these 4-gauge welding cables coming down from our 8 solar panels on the roof, and I need to connect one of them to 2 of these and the other one to the other 2. So I need to split this into 2 cables. Now the normal way to do that is you would get a terminal block of some kind and put a lug on it, like this one for example. Put a lug on there, have a terminal block, and then have some smaller cable like this for example, and have that going to the 2 inputs. Unfortunately, I don't have terminal blocks, I don't have space for it, so what I'm going to do is split this wire, or fork it, into 2 separate cables. So the way I'm going to do that is strip off about yay much of the insulating jacket, and you'll notice the inside cable on these welding cables is actually made from 7 groups of wire. So I'll split those apart. Hopefully you guys can see that. So without splitting hairs and counting individual strands, that's close enough. So as you can imagine, jamming a big multi-conductor wire like this into a small hole like that, especially repeatedly, you're going to fray the ends and it's going to turn into a mess and be difficult to work with. And for that reason, they make wire ferrules. Not to be confused with Will Ferrell. So these just slide over the wires, and when you tighten them down inside the terminal, it crushes the conductors on the inside so that it still makes good contact, but allows you to remove the wire several times without it all fraying to pieces. It's important for big current carrying wires like this to have good contact, and that's why you wouldn't want to solder them to make it a solid solder blob, because if you think about a big round conductor like that, and then in the terminal, the wire terminal comes to crush the wire, it's only actually contacting top and bottom. See that? So you don't want it rigid and hard. If you think of a big multi-conductor cable, when it comes to touch it, it crushes it all and makes really good contact. And so that's why these wire ferrules are soft, and when you screw down the terminal, it still is able to flatten the wires and make nice contact without making it rigid. I've got some shrink wrap over the conductors, and you want to heat that nice and gently. And I've just finished it off by trimming away any little fuzzies that are hanging on the outside of the ferrules. And then if you want, you can give them a little bit of a pre-crush just so they don't come off on you before you get to installing them. And let's put them in. Alrighty, see, lots of people online don't quite understand how these quick connect terminals work. They are very heavy springs, as you can see. It's hard on the thumbs, especially if you don't have gorilla thumbs. So the way they're designed is with this hole in the end, and you can use an Allen key or a screwdriver and just pop those open. That's ready to go. And then these go into the PV input. There you go. Alright, so there they are. The other big hole in these terminal blocks is for the diversion heat output. That's where the SBMS0 can divert the power coming in from the solar panels and sends it to a heating load, such as hot water heater or electric in-floor heat or that sort of thing. We will be doing that in an upcoming video, but for now we will just leave those unpopulated. So, of course, from here, now we need to connect the DSSRs to the input side of this 200 amp shunt. So let's go to the wire drawer and see what we have there. Well, this is the drawer where I keep my assorted lengths of wire. And that'll be perfect. That one too. Alright, next we need to provide a ground to all of the DSSRs. So I found this in the drawer there. And it's just this connector here. Okay, so lucky to find this in the drawer. That's going to be perfect. I've put some Noah locks on there already. Perfect. Alright, so this cable will connect each of the DSSR-20's trigger wires in parallel. The blue is for battery, yellow is for heat. So I'll put those in here now. So we're on the home stretch now. The last component to install is the DEX16. This is controlled by the SBMS0, and it just triggers your heating or battery charging outputs. Said simply, this thing signals these DSSRs to turn on. It could also be used to turn on an external grid charger, or if you have a DC to DC charge converter from your vehicle, you can use this to trigger that as well. So connections are fairly straightforward. Oh, I should also mention, it too has these PCB spacers, which I've glued on, and then I've put some 3M VHB because it will eventually be stuck to the battery right about here. But I'm going to wire the connections first before putting it in. Connections are pretty simple. The two wires coming from the SBMS0, positive and negative, which I've put some shrink wrap on here just to keep it easy. Next, I've got a ground and a fused supply from the battery just to power the logic in this thing. And this is also the same ground from the DSSR-20s. I realize I'm going in the back of the connector, but I think it looks classy. Lastly, we connect the two wires that go down to the DSSR-20s. This is the battery trigger is in blue and heat in yellow, and we very simply connect to battery plus and heat plus. Alright, so that's all the wiring done. Pull off the VHB back liner. The DEC 16 only requires a few milliamps to power its circuitry to trigger these DSSR-20s, and so I wasn't expecting it to be enough current to power this all on already, but it is. If I pull this light out, you guys can see the glowing red lights here. Each of the DSSR-20s has an indicator in red showing that it's charging the battery, and also up here, I don't know if you can see this one on the DEC 16, also a glowing LED. And as we can clearly see on the SBMS 0, oops, yeah, 80 amps or 1000 watts. So that's the installation mostly handled. I'm going to clean up here a little bit and tidy up this wiring. This of course is temporary right now, so I'm going to move this to the other side of the compartment and wire it all in properly. Alright, there it is, kind of all buttoned up. I've got the SBMS 0 in the panel to wall mount adapter, which I 3D printed, and the valence leads come out the bottom here, and they're all concealed in this wire track. And I've redone my wiring for the breakers a little bit, tidied it up. I do still have some tidying I want to do, and labeling of some new wires and so on, but I'll leave that for now. The other thing is I wanted to make a comment about previous videos and this video where I'm using an impact driver to tighten these bolts on the lithium iron phosphate cells. Everyone is suggesting that I'm over torquing them. But the reason I use the impact is to spin it in and out quickly, and it allows me to be away from all these copper bus bars with a long shaft. This driver I used to have wrapped in hockey tape, but now I use this other fabric shield when I think of it. But that allows me to go in and just get them in and out without having a big long wrench, a metallic wrench to turn them, because that's a big risk of shorting out and causing some smoke to get out that you don't want to get out. But rest assured, I do have a correct torque wrench set to 160 foot-pounds, or rather 160 inch-pounds. And as I'll show you now, this impact wrench doesn't tighten past 160 foot-pounds on the first click as I use it. So as I just demonstrated, I got a quarter turn more out of these bolts before the torque wrench clicks. So if you know how to use your impact wrench and you're familiar with how to use it, I think that's totally fine, and it's not like I'm sitting here going full onions on the trigger. It's just to spin it in quickly so that I don't have to sit here with a long metallic wrench crossing all these copper bars that could be a short circuit risk. So now I will go through again. I've added some Nolox corrosion inhibitant under some of these bus bars again, cleaned them up. And so now I'm going to go through and retorque everything down to 160 inch-pounds, which is the spec for the CALB 180 cells. So now I've got all the batteries all torqued down. I'm going to clean up this heavy polycarbonate plate and reinstall that just so that I can breathe easier working in here. A lot less pucker factor. check that out. There's all our supporting channel members. Their support lets me make videos like this and take the time to edit and put together these hopefully informative videos. If you're interested in stuff like this, consider hitting the join button down below. It gives you early access to all of our videos and many other perks you can see down below. I'm going to try and make this into a 3, maybe 4-part series where we harvest data from the solar controller into Python on Raspberry Pi, parse that and send it to InfluxDB, graph it with Grafana, send it to Blink so that we can use a smartphone app and just quickly check in on all sorts of stats about the automation systems in the truck. Additionally, in the next video, I will probably be installing this 600 watt 12 volt heater element into our hot water heater and implementing the the power diversion functionality built into the DSSR 20s. So that'll probably be in the next video, and then another video showing the grid charger. We have a 750 watt Meanwell power supply that can charge our lithium batteries and is switched by the DEC 16, which you saw me install there. So that's all coming up in future videos. I'm going to try and get 3 or 4 out in a little mini series here in the coming weeks. So if you're interested in that, consider hitting subscribe down below. YouTube Analytics says only 3% of our viewers are subscribed. So if you like our sort of stuff, consider hitting subscribe and ring that bell. So that's going to be it for this time. Thanks so much for tuning in. Thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.